Well, hey there. It certainly has been a while since I uploaded my last video, hasn't it? It's been even longer since my last One Piece video. I could go into detail about the reasons for this unexpectedly long hiatus I've been on, but I don't want to make this part of the video too bloated. I'll just say that my life has been pretty weird this year. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. But hey guys, I'm back, and now that elephant's been addressed, let's get on to the actual video. So after the fantastic Zoe arc, I was incredibly excited to move forward in the One Piece journey. Zoe set up so much interesting stuff for this arc, so to say I was looking forward to reading Whole Cake Island would be quite the understatement. But outside of my own excitement, I was also seeing some pretty divisive opinions regarding this arc on the internet. Some saying this arc was phenomenal and the best of post-time skip One Piece yet, while others claimed it was an absolute slog that had them worried about the series going forward. A lot of those discussions had died down by the time I got around to reading this arc, most likely because both the manga and anime had moved on to Wano by then. But I still kept those divisive thoughts in the back of my head when reading, and I was super curious how I was going to feel about it when I finished. So how did I end up feeling about it? Well, before I get into that, there are a few things to note. One, for those curious, the gameplay footage in the background is from Pirate Warriors 4. Those of you who have seen my other One Piece videos know I used Pirate Warriors 3 footage in the background, but this video took me so long to make that another Pirate Warriors game has released since, and it has Whole Cake Island levels in it, so it worked out. Secondly, if I hadn't made it obvious enough at this point, I will be discussing Whole Cake Island as it plays out in the manga. I started my One Piece journey with the manga, and while I've watched a lot of the anime since, I'm still super far behind on it, and in my opinion the manga is still the best version of the story. Last but certainly not least is a spoiler warning. If you plan on reading or watching One Piece at any point, or have started it but haven't gotten to the Whole Cake Island arc, or the Reverie arc after it, because I do plan to briefly talk about that one too. I'll be talking spoilers from here on, so if you want to avoid them, I would recommend clicking off the video now. Don't worry, it'll be here when you're ready for it, or at least I sure hope it is. Alright, so to talk about this incredibly large arc, I'm gonna have to discuss it in sections. I'm going to try and talk about most of the major sections roughly in chronological order, and address what I liked and disliked about them, while also going into other topics, when I feel it'd be a good time to slide those discussions in. Luckily, the One Piece wiki, shoutouts to them, has a great synopsis for this arc that divides the story into sections, so I'm going to try and go based off of that for everything up until the escape from Totoland. That last part of the story, I'll go over a bit differently. With that being said, let's start at the beginning with the Straw Hats' arrival to Totoland. So the opening of pretty much every story arc in One Piece is pretty fantastic, and this arc is no exception. It's a testament to Oda's talent for world building that each new area the Straw Hats arrive in manages to be so engaging, and I think Whole Cake might just have one of the best opening sequences in the series yet. One reason for this is the slow revelation of the Vinsmoke family, who of course we first heard about back on Zoe. The introduction of Yonji and especially Reiju is just fantastic, showing us what this family is like while still keeping a lot of them a mystery for us to learn more about through Sanji later on. Another aspect I think really helps this opening is Totoland itself, which I think makes a great segue into talking about the main setting for this arc. I've mentioned this in both my Dressrosa and Zoe videos, but the way Oda manages to keep upping himself with these incredibly inventive settings in the post-time skip era of One Piece is insane to me. Totoland being this almost Disney-like wonderland made of sweets where Big Mom wants to bring together members of all races to live together is just so bizarre, and unlike anything I would have expected from her territory, minus the sweets part that makes total sense. It's not until we start to learn more about Big Mom's ways of operating Totoland that we really start to see the disturbing side of this seeming paradise. Anyways, back to this first part of the story, Luffy and Chopper eating an entire house the moment they hit land was hilarious. We are also introduced to a few other notable characters, including Charlotte Pudding, who I'll have more to say on later, and Big Mom herself, Charlotte Linlin. The first scene where we finally get to see Big Mom for the first time was really interesting. I think it was honestly a perfect introduction for the kind of character she is. But I will say, the introduction to the element of her destructive cravings wasn't my favorite. Like, I get that it's important to introduce this element to her character, since it plays a big role in the arc's finale, but I don't know, it just seemed odd to me to have this be the first thing we see her doing after her really cool introduction. But hey, because of that scene we get to see Jinbei for the first time since Fishman Island, so that's pretty great, and he'll obviously go on to have a big role for the rest of the arc. But overall, this first part of the arc was great. Now we move on to the Straw Hats' arrival onto Whole Cake Island itself and the Seducing Wood section. This section was the first part where I felt like the arc started to drag its feet a bit. I wouldn't say it's bad by any means, there's some great parts to it, but I felt like we were in the Seducing Woods for way too long for what this part of the narrative ultimately amounted to. It felt like a lot of this part was just the Straw Hats getting lost and being weirded out by stuff, especially at first. I imagine reading this part of the arc week to week probably got tiring for some. It's not until Charlotte Brûlé reveals herself that it feels like things start actually happening. Unfortunately, I really didn't like Brûlé that much during this part of the arc, and her powers, while neat, didn't give me much added appreciation for her. That being said, I do really like how her powers come into play for the rest of the arc, especially the Mirror World. Once Charlotte Cracker shows up, I really started to enjoy this part a lot more. I like how as one of Big Mom's Sweet 3 commanders, he really shows us how powerful those working under an emperor can be. His fight with Luffy was a lot of fun, especially once Luffy and Nami started to team up. Speaking of which, can we please get some more Straw Hat team-ups like this? It was super fun to see Nami and Luffy working together, and using each other's strengths to take on Cracker. Also, apparently Gear 4 Tank Man is a thing, I guess? I don't know what to make of it, but it's there, and it was the key to victory apparently. But yeah, the Seducing Woods section had some great parts to it, had important setup for later story elements, and had neat world building info, but I definitely felt it could have been shorter. Still solid though. Now, before I move on to the Vinsmoke family reunion section and start gushing about how good it is, I want to take a moment to talk about some of the other subplots going on alongside both the Seducing Woods and the Vinsmoke family reunion sections. Like I said earlier, this arc is huge, so some parts of it just aren't big enough to get their own section, and will have to be lumped together like this. So first, I'll talk about Chopper and Carrot's adventures in the Mirror World. This was a cute part that I think does its purpose of establishing more about the Mirror World, which obviously is important for the rest of the arc. Next, the early parts of Brook and Pedro's side mission to get a copy of Big Mom's Road Poneglyph. This section is great, and I'll have more to say on it later, but for now, it adds a lot to Pedro's character, and it was nice to check in with Brook and Pedro during the events in Seducing Wood and Sanji's family reunion. Speaking of which, let's dive into that part. I had mentioned my appreciation of it earlier, but to be even more frank, I think this section is probably my favorite part of the arc. This and Luffy vs. Katakuri, but we'll get to that later. I will admit, going into this arc I was a little worried about how Oda was going to handle adding backstory to Sanji, a character we've known for well over 700 chapters at this point. Sanji already got backstory back in the Baratie arc, and I was worried that adding more to that would cheapen that original story. Boy, was that worry misplaced. What this section does for the character of Sanji is some of the best characterization any of the Straw Hats have gotten in post-time skip One Piece yet. It doesn't detract, but actually adds to my appreciation of Sanji's story in Baratie. I remember shortly after I read this part of Whole Cake, I rewatched the episode of East Blue Special that Toei made that retold condensed versions of the original 5 Straw Hats stories in East Blue, and when I got to the scene where Sanji leaves the Baratie and Zeph, that scene hit me so much harder than ever before because of what Oda adds to Sanji's character in the Whole Cake arc. And I can't imagine that was easy to pull off, but somehow he did it. This part doesn't only benefit Sanji though, as it made me like Reiju even more, which is a trend that will continue. Reiju is great, but also, despite how horrible they are, I still really came to like Ichiji, Niji, and Yonji too. It might help that Germa 66 is a giant Super Sentai reference, I don't know. Anyway, this part also adds to the world building on the North Blue, which is really nice to see, since it's pretty rare for us to learn more about the oceans outside of the East Blue and the Grand Line. And I gotta mention the Luffy vs. Sanji fight because I mean, come on, that was just so heart-wrenching. It was also a great character moment for Luffy, showing once again what an amazing protagonist and captain he is. Also, that scene where Sanji decides to marry Pudding to save his crew in the Baratie was just incredibly done, and even more tragic in hindsight once Pudding reveals her true colors later. This entire part of the arc is just fantastic. So this next part, which I like to think of as the beginning of this arc's second act, is a bit all over the place, but there's definitely some key moments to discuss. First, Luffy and Nami get captured and learn about Pudding's true nature, which we as the audience then learn about shortly after alongside Reiju and Sanji. I'm of two minds on this. On one hand, I initially thought it was lame that Pudding ended up being evil because of course she is, she's Big Mom's daughter. On the other hand, I really grew to like Pudding later on in the arc once we started to learn more about her, so it doesn't really bother me too much. Next, we get more of Brook and Pedro being awesome. I really like Pedro's fight with Tamago, but I love Brook in this part. His Soul King ability was really cool, but his square up with Big Mom was too good. He not only had the gall to call an Emperor of the Sea young lady, but he also fought her by himself. Finally, Oda is giving my boy Brook some time in the spotlight post-Thriller Bark. I am living for this. Oh, I got a little too excited there. Where were we again? Oh yeah, so then Jinbei breaks Luffy and Nami free, and that was a really nice reunion. Then once again, another great Brook moment. He's reunited with the rest of the crew in the Mirror World minus Luffy, and he reveals that he actually managed to get a copy of Big Mom's Road Poneglyph. Brook really is the MVP of this arc, and I couldn't be happier for him, he deserves it. Then Luffy and Sanji reunite for what is another incredible scene for both characters. Despite how scattered it can feel at points, this section is very well executed. So now we move on to the alliance with the Fire Tank Pirates as well as the wedding and tea party itself. So I really like this part for a few reasons. First, I really liked learning more about Beg and his crew. It's nice how we're learning more and more about the worst generation in the post-time skip era. Beg's plan to assassinate Big Mom did a great job of illustrating just how hard it is to kill her. On to the tea party itself, there is just so much to talk about here. The introduction of the Underworld Emperors was really cool, my personal favorites being Morgan's and Stussy. Sanji's response to Pudding's third eye was so good, and the way it affected her feelings towards him for the rest of the arc was really fun. Luffy and his many mirror clones breaking out of that cake was a neat visual. Jinbei's official declaration to Big Mom of wanting to join the Straw Hats was fantastic. Sanji standing on the Vinsmoke's table before he saved them was so cathartic. And my boy Brook once again coming in for the clutch, breaking the Mother Carmel photo. Truly the MVP, can't stress it enough. I like the part where there was just so much going on that Big Mom was having a hard time knowing what to react to first. Honestly, that's kind of how writing this part of the script felt. So much happens here, but in the end, despite almost everything going as planned, the assassination plot fails because of course it does. Now the Straw Hats and the Fire Tank Pirates have to flee. I really enjoyed the chaotic nature of the tea party. There's just so much going on though it makes it hard to write about, but reading it, such a fun time. Now I want to briefly discuss the Big Mom flashback because it's really good. I think it does add a lot to Big Mom as a character, both by explaining her behavior and also showing why her territory is the way that it is. The only other major thing I'll add is that when I first read it, I didn't really understand why her friends and Mother Carmel disappeared, or how she got Mother Carmel's devil fruit powers. But my god, once it clicked for me, it completely changed my perspective on that part of the flashback because wow, that's dark, even for One Piece. And now it's time to discuss what I consider the third act for this arc, being the Straw Hats' escape from Toddleland. Now, I'm not going to break this section up into chronological parts like I did for the first two acts, because quite frankly, it's a lot to go over and it's very repetitive. So I'm instead going to broaden the discussion a bit and talk about my main issue with this last stretch of the story, and then my favorite part of it. My main grievance with this last part of the narrative is very similar to my complaint with the Seducing Wood section, just on a larger scale. This final part of the arc, in my opinion, is too long for what it is. There were a few points while I was reading this part of the arc that I thought to myself, how have they not made it out of there yet? And that's me binge reading the arc. I can only imagine that sentiment was even greater for some week-to-week readers when this arc was first being published. Now, by the nature of me pointing out this complaint, it may make this issue seem bigger than it really is. I want to stress that this section is still really good. Oda did put in enough great character moments that by the time I would start to wonder how much more I had to read, something really cool would happen and I immediately would be invested again. I just wanted to put my main issue out there because it did affect my enjoyment to some extent. Now as for my favorite part of this final act for Whole Cake, it's gotta be the Luffy vs Katakuri fight. I doubt this is any kind of hot take, but in my opinion, Luffy vs Katakuri is the best fight in One Piece so far. What I love about it is how much of this fight is psychological. The Grand Line Review has a great video about this fight that I'll leave in the description that does an excellent job going over what exactly I mean by that. In terms of pure strength and skill, the fight was already decided before it even began. Katakuri was clearly the victor in those departments. But the mindsets of Luffy and Katakuri going into the fight were completely different. Not only that, but the mindset for both combatants changed over the course of the fight, which reflected in how the battle ultimately panned out. It was all so well done. Also, Gear 4 Snake Man is awesome. I can't wait to see it again. Luffy vs Katakuri was a fantastic fight and has me excited for what Wano has in store in that department. Now that I've talked about those aspects of the final arc, I'm now going to talk about my thoughts on how certain characters were utilized throughout this arc. I'll put a focus on what they did in the Escape from Toddleland sequence, since, as I said earlier, there are a lot of great character moments in that final act, and I do want to talk about them. I've already talked about Luffy and Sanji a good bit already, but just to add a little more, I really like how once they got to the Sunny, Luffy immediately assessed that Katakuri was the biggest threat, and he found a way to get them both into the mirror world to give his crew a chance to escape. As for Sanji, I liked his dynamic with Pudding in that final part, and his determination to wow Big Mom with such an amazing wedding cake it would knock her out was great to see, even if it didn't quite turn out how he expected. I think I should talk about Pedro next. Oda made it pretty obvious throughout Pedro's various scenes that he was likely going to die at some point in this arc. I was just glad to see that it was on his terms and that his sacrifice ended up not being in vain, as it gave the Straw Hats the opportunity they needed to get away. Also, his sacrifice served as a great character moment for Carrot. Speaking of Carrot, I loved her in this arc. She was super cute and made for a great lookout. The part where they introduced her Sulong form was so cool, and she was quite the force to be reckoned with in that form. I've seen some people say that they want Carrot to join the Straw Hat crew, and I'm on board. I would love that so much. The Straw Hat crew has always been quite the sausage fest, so getting another female character in the mix would be great. I'll touch on Chopper next because unfortunately I don't have too much to say here. He has some nice moments here or there, and seeing his monster form is always a treat, but he didn't make as much of an impact as the other crew members. I'm hoping the Wano arc gives him more to do. I already talked about Brook a lot, so I'll just reiterate how nice it is that he finally gets some great moments in this arc, because he hasn't really had much since Thriller Bark. Nami also had some fantastic character moments throughout this arc, but my favorites were probably the ones that involved Zeus. Zeus is such a neat power-up for Nami, and after seeing its devastating potential on Whole Cake, I'm very curious how she'll fare in the Wano arc. As for Jinbei, it was great getting to see him finally take on the role of the helmsman of the Straw Hats. I'm just sad he didn't get to go with them to Wano. That being said, his final scene with Luffy was great, and his arrival at Wano will be something to look forward to. Now that we've covered the Straw Hats and their allies, let's move on to what might be a more controversial opinion. I like pudding. There, I said it. Don't get me wrong, I totally understand why people wouldn't like her weird split personality quirk, but I don't know, there's just something about how it was handled that was just really charming to me. Also, the part where she kissed Sanji and then used her memory powers to make him forget about it at the end of the arc was such a sad moment to me. While we're on the topic of the Charlotte family, I'll quickly mention Katakuri and Brûlé. I really came to like Katakuri over the course of his fight with Luffy, and that was cemented with his flashback we get at the end of the arc. So well done, especially considering how short it was. And despite not liking her at first, by the end of this arc, I really liked Brûlé because of her dynamic with Katakuri. Also, I gotta give a shout out once again for my girl Reiju. Her story in this arc was so interesting to follow and nuanced. The last character I want to touch on is Big Mom herself. I enjoyed her throughout this arc. She's such a different villain than Doflamingo, which is interesting to see. The end of this arc and parts of the Reverie makes it seem like she's gonna follow the Straw Hats to Wano, so I'm curious what role she'll play in that arc. But yeah guys, this arc was pretty amazing. Not my favorite post-time skip arc, I personally still prefer Dressrosa and Zoe, but still a really fun arc with some absolutely fantastic character moments. Alright, now that I've discussed my thoughts on the Whole Cake Island arc, I do want to briefly give my thoughts on the Reverie. That arc isn't really big enough to make up its own video, but it was also too amazing to ignore completely. So, the Reverie arc was only 6 chapters long, and yet Oda packed so much great stuff in there, it's kinda nuts. I really don't think it's hyperbole to say that the Reverie arc is the greatest 6 consecutive chapters in the series up to this point. It had so many great character interactions, some fantastic twists, and had so many new elements to add to the overarching story, it's honestly still hard to wrap my head around it all. It's truly a testament to the story and world Oda has created over 900 plus chapters of manga for this arc not only to be as engaging as it is, despite it largely not focusing on the Straw Hats, but also for it to feel as rewarding to readers as it does. It's really hard for me to pick a favorite part of this arc, and even now, I can't bring myself to name just one thing, so I'll list 3. First, I love getting to see all these characters who have been affected by the Straw Hats interact. This arc had Rebecca talking to Kobe, it had Shirahoshi talking to Garp, and even more fun interactions. It's all just really great to see. Seeing Vivi again was particularly awesome. I already mentioned that when she showed up during Zoe, but still, I really like Vivi, and I'm glad to see she gets to be featured in the story again. The second thing I'll mention is the existence of Eam, cause like, what? I'm so curious about him, and literally everything that has to do with him. What is that giant straw hat he was looking at? Why did he have an interest in those particular wanted posters and pictures? How did he become the leader of the entire world government? So many questions, and I can't wait to get the answers. Third, why the heck was Shanks meeting with the 5 elders? Every time Shanks makes an appearance, it's always great, but this time in particular felt different. What was he there to talk with them about? I'm so curious, I have so many questions. But yeah, the Reverie arc overall was amazing, and the fact that it ended with the beginning of the actual Reverie itself makes me think it might be playing a role in some way during the Wano arc, so I'm very excited to keep on reading. But speaking of Wano, I think that makes for a good place to start wrapping this thing up, because I am too excited to get back to reading. I have a feeling that while I'm in the process of editing this video, Editor Me will probably get really excited and start reading Wano, so I think I'll give him a chance to say where he's at now and how he's feeling about it so far. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the Whole Cake Island and Reverie arcs. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give the video a like. Also, let me know your thoughts on these arcs in the comments section below. I'm super curious how the community feels about these arcs in particular. If you like what I do here, make sure to subscribe. That being said, I think I'm going to be taking a break from making manga videos for a while, since I doubt I'll be making a Wano video until after the arc concludes at the earliest, and with how long that arc already is, it'll likely be a while. For the time being, I think I'm going to try making videos out of another passion of mine being video games. I'm still deciding on what game in particular I want to make a video on. I have a few in mind, but I'm excited to work on whatever video it ends up being when the time comes. With all that said, if that sounds interesting to you, then I'd once again recommend hitting that subscribe button. I'm going to try really hard not to take as big of a hiatus between videos this time. If you want to hear from me outside of videos, then make sure to follow me on Twitter. I tweet pretty regularly about all sorts of things, including my progress through One Piece, my thoughts on weekly chapters of My Hero Academia, what video games I'm interested in, and so on. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.